Disclaimer: this video is a historical documentary created for educational purposes. All scenes are artistic reenactments based on documented events. No real violence is shown or promoted. The fight is over. The sand of the Colosseum is soaked with blood. A gladiator stands victorious, his arm raised to the emperor. Hollywood paints a pretty clear picture of what happens next: gold, glory, maybe even his freedom. We see the bruised but honorable hero walking out of the arena to live a quiet life. But history is rarely that clean. The same Roman sources that tell us about gladiatorial glory also contain unsettling whispers of rewards far darker than gold, prizes that weren't objects, but people. For decades, a tantalizing, horrifying idea has floated around popular history, a name for what some believe was the gladiator's ultimate secret prize, Victoria Carnalis, the carnal victory. This was supposedly a state-run system for handing out captive women, the spoils of war, to the arena's champions as an official reward. A bureaucracy of abuse hidden just beneath the grand spectacle. But here's the unvarnished truth. The term Victoria Carnalis doesn't appear in a single Roman record. There's no evidence of a formal government program for giving out women like trophies. It's a modern myth, but this myth was born from a reality that was, in many ways, far more terrifying. The real story isn't about a neat secret system of abuse. It's about how the entire machine of the Roman Empire, its laws, its wars, its entertainment, was built on a foundation of casual, chaotic, and total dehumanization, where the sword erased the line between a person and property. This isn't the story of a secret system. It's the story of a horror that happened in plain sight. To understand what really happened in the shadow of the Colosseum, you have to get your head around the cold logic of Roman law. When a Roman legion conquered a new territory, whether in Gaul, Judea, or Britannia, they didn't just beat an army, they processed an entire population. Captives taken in war weren't seen as prisoners with rights. They were legally classified as aures hostiles, enemy property. From the moment of capture, they were essentially no longer legally human. They became things, objects, no different than a captured horse, a sack of grain, or a piece of furniture. This wasn't some hidden rule. It was a core principle of Roman expansion. It meant you couldn't commit a crime against a captive any more than you could against a table. This legal status is what made the whole Roman economy of slavery and spectacle possible. Women captured in war were paraded through Rome during triumphs. Living trophies meant to show the absolute power of the empire. After the parade, they were swallowed by the massive slave market. Their fate wasn't determined by morality, but by logistics. Some were sold into homes, where sexual exploitation by their masters was not just common but an expected reality. Others were sent to the mines, a virtual death sentence of hard labor, and some were destined for the world of the arena. The idea that these women were kept in special cells deep inside the Colosseum's hypogeum, warehoused and cataloged for gladiators, is a powerful and disturbing image. But it's not accurate. The hypogeum, that vast, two-level structure beneath the arena floor, was a marvel of Roman engineering, but it was essentially the backstage for the show. It was a maze of tunnels, animal pens, and storage rooms, packed with complex machinery, elevators, and trapdoors that could hoist a lion, a bear, or stage scenery into the arena in seconds. It held gladiators in waiting rooms and housed the slaves who operated all that machinery in the dark. There's no archaeological evidence it was a long-term prison for captive women waiting to be distributed. The reality didn't need to be that organized to be horrific. The Roman games, the Munera, were much more than just entertainment. They were a powerful tool for political propaganda. Every event reinforced the social order. At the very top sat the emperor, the source of all power. At the very bottom were the condemned criminals and captives, whose deaths served as a public performance of Roman justice and dominance. The gladiator existed in a strange space between these two extremes. Most were slaves, prisoners of war, or criminals living under brutal discipline. They were infames, disgraced at the bottom of the social ladder. And yet, a successful gladiator could become a celebrity on par with a modern athlete. They were idolized. Graffiti from Pompeii cheers their names. Their sweat was bottled and sold as an aphrodisiac. Roman noblewomen were said to be obsessed with them, sometimes leading to secret affairs. The poet Juvenal, in his famous satires, tells the story of a senator's wife named Epia, who left her family to run off to Egypt with her gladiator lover, a man he calls scarred and broken. Juvenal wrote this to criticize what he saw as the falling morals of Roman women, but it shows the powerful appeal these fighters had. So, what were their rewards? They got prize money, sometimes huge amounts. The best of the best could eventually win their freedom, symbolized by a wooden sword called the rudis. But what about those darker rumors? While there's no official record of Victoria Carnalis, the idea of victorious fighters getting sexual access to female slaves is completely believable in the Roman context. A lanista, the owner of a gladiator school, could have easily given a prized fighter a bonus like this. A rich sponsor of the games could offer a female slave as a private gift. This wouldn't have been a state program. It would have been a casual transaction, just one person exercising their property rights over another. The woman, legally an object, would have had no say. This wasn't a formal reward system, but a natural consequence of a society where some people were property, and their bodies were just another resource for the powerful. It's easy to think of history as something distant and settled, but we're constantly re-examining the past, pulling apart the brutal facts from the fictions they inspire. If you find this deeper, more complex look at the Roman world as fascinating as we do, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We release new videos every week that peel back the layers of stories you thought you knew. The exploitation of women in the arena wasn't always behind the scenes. Sometimes it was the main event. While the image of the female gladiator, or gladiatrix, is popular today, they were incredibly rare and always treated as an exotic, almost scandalous spectacle. The poet Martial, writing about the Colosseum's opening games in 80 AD, describes women fighting and compares them to mythical Amazons to stress how unusual it was. The historian Cassius Dio also mentions that the Emperor Domitian put on games featuring women and dwarves fighting each other at night purely for shock value. But this was not a normal career path. It was a bizarre sideshow. The existence of female gladiators deeply unsettled the Roman elite. The poet Juvenal wrote with contempt about high-born women who took up gladiator training, seeing it as a grotesque violation of feminine decency. For a woman to fight and bleed in public for entertainment was to reject her proper role in Roman society. The scandal got so big that in 200 AD, the Emperor Septimius Severus officially banned all women from fighting in the arena. Historical sources suggest he did this because women were competing so fiercely it was seen as a stain on the dignity of Roman womanhood itself. The gladiatrix quickly vanished from history, a brief and controversial chapter closed by the emperor's decree. More common and far more horrifying were the damnatio ad bestias, condemnation by beasts, and the so-called mythological reenactments. These were public executions dressed up as theater. Condemned people, men and women, were dressed as figures from myth and forced to act out their brutal deaths. A woman might be tied to a bull to reenact the myth of Pasiphae, or forced into other scenarios of sexual violence and murder for the cheering crowd. This was the arena's logic taken to its absolute extreme. human suffering as public art, a final, terrible display of the state's power over life and death. So let's go back to where we started, Victoria Carnalis. The name is a fiction. The neat, bureaucratic system of sexual rewards is a myth. But the truth it points to is undeniable. The Roman world ran on a spectrum of exploitation, where the lines between conquest, slavery, entertainment, and sexual violence were hopelessly blurred. A victorious gladiator's reward wasn't a captive woman delivered by a state official with a clipboard. The reality was murkier, more ordinary, and more widespread. His reward was simply existing for a brief moment on a higher rung of a brutal power structure. He was a celebrated slave whose owner might let him use another, less valuable slave. He was a public hero in a system that saw most people as disposable. The real horror of Rome isn't hidden in some secret system. It's right out in the open. In the laws that said people could be property, in the cheers of the crowd watching a person get torn apart, and in the casual way historians like Martial and Juvenal mention these atrocities, not as shocking events, but as everyday facts of life. The Colosseum stands today as a monument to imperial grandeur, but it's also a monument to a system that, in full view of the world, perfected the art of turning human beings into things. And that is a truth far darker than any myth.